Before we get started, just a reminder that this is being live streamed, so you can share this out on Twitter with your communities to watch along. We will begin in about 1 minute. All right, we have a ton of great stuff to get through today, and I, of course, want to leave the majority of the time to our wonderful panelists. So we will go ahead and get started. So good afternoon and welcome to this year's CEF Budget Book Briefing. My name is Emily Crawford and I am the Vice President of the CEF Board of Directors and the Director of Government Relations for the National Council for Community and Education Partnerships, representing the Gear Up College Access Program. Every year, CEF members and leadership come together to write this incredible education budget resource. So a huge thank you to all the CEF members and advocates who wrote and edited articles and shared video vignettes highlighting program impact. We all know how important this work is to support education access and opportunity across the education spectrum. So this resource will support our advocacy work greatly. Today, you will be hearing from some great panelists doing the work on the ground, along with Sarah Abernathy of CEF, Jose Miranda of the Association of Community College Trustees, and Sarah Cohen of the American Federation of Teachers. A huge special thank you to the CEF members who arranged for today's speakers, Becky Levine of AskMe, Sarah Cohen of the American Federation of Teachers, Tammy Bartlett of the Student Veterans of America, Jose Miranda of the Association of Community College Trustees, and Barry Saisney of the American Alliance of Museums. I will now hand it over to Sarah Abernathy, Executive Director of CEF.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are very excited. Every year, CEF produces this, what we call our budget book. It's an awesome advocacy tool, but it's also a wonderful reference tool, descriptions of every national education program, contact information for the CEF members who wrote the book, charts about the funding history. I thought before we started and turned over quickly to our panelists, I wanted to give a very short overview of where we are in education funding, which is a combination of bad news and good news. Can I have the next slide, please? So the bad news is that education funding has been really stagnant from the federal level for more than a decade, as a result mostly of the statutory spending caps that were in place from 2013 through 2021. You can see from this slide that elementary and secondary education only really started increasing when the caps were lifted in 22 and 23, but the rest of education funding has been flat, and that does not take account into inflation. The other bad news is that Congress is tied up this year trying to figure out what level of funding to allow for the whole government. Yesterday, the House, on a totally partisan basis, passed a bill that would increase the debt ceiling for a year or so in exchange for making really big cuts in discretionary spending, which is where most of education funding is, for the next 10 years. Those caps are even tighter than the levels that resulted in this low level of education funding for the decade when they were in place before. So that's the bad news. Next slide, please. The good news is that the president has submitted a budget for the coming year that has a $10.8 billion, 13.6% increase for education programs. There's other education programs outside the Department of Ed, of course, that also got increased. And this is a really hopeful sign for what might be possible if Congress would agree to provide that much. But the green line in this chart shows what the funding levels would have been needed to keep pace with inflation starting with 2011. And you can see that even the president's really big increase for 2024 still is below the 2011 level of services. I would argue that we want to return not to the 2011 level of services because the needs have grown since then, that it needs to be even higher. The other good news, if I can have the next slide, is that a majority of the public agrees. Even though most feel that the size of government is too large, a majority of both Republicans and Democrats agreed that there was too little education spending. There are some other areas where they also thought there was too little funding, which includes childcare. This chart just shows the top three and then assistance for childcare. Next slide, please. So some of that is the reasons behind this are detailed in our budget book. And everyone who's attending this briefing will get access to an electronic copy of it. The charts from the book are available on our website, which is www.cef.org. Right now, you can also see some of the video stories that are in the budget book that are on our website. And we encourage you to follow CEF on Twitter, we're at EdFunding, or check out our website where we post new information. But with that, that's sort of the big picture overview of education funding and the fact that Congress has not yet acted to set levels for fiscal year 24, but that it's going to be a challenging fiscal year. And we encourage people to advocate, tell their members of Congress why education funding matters. And we'll now hear from 5 people who are working in education, covering the continuum, who will talk about different parts of education funding and the difference it makes. With that, we can stop using the slides, and I will turn it over to Jose to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm delighted to introduce our incredible lineup of panelists. These are folks who are in our states and our communities, ensuring that the federal resources that are provided for education are well served for many of our students, and emphasizing the additional need for a lot of our federal resources. So first off, we'll have Linda McPherson. Linda is a native of Guyana who immigrated to the United States as a teenager and has since lived in Brooklyn. She joined DC 1707, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME for short, in 1996 and quickly rose through the ranks. She is now Vice President of DC 37 and President of the Head Start Local 95. She works at Community Parents, Inc. and Medgar Evers Head Start as Family Service Coordinator. She's also active in the Guyanese and Caribbean communities as an immigrant advocate. She earned a bachelor's degree in social science from the College of New Rochelle. Up next, we'll also hear from Greg Crewy. Greg is a social studies teacher. He was previously has been a Title I math teacher and a special education teacher who has worked with every grade level and served many students, including but not limited to students with most of the more common disabilities, cognitive impairments, dyslexia, ADHD, developmental delays, and autistic tendencies. He's part of his school leadership team and has served as a mentor teacher and is the president of the Local 4906 of the American Federation of Teachers in McDowell County, West Virginia. In that capacity, he works with Reconnecting McDowell, a community school initiative run cooperatively through AFD and McDowell County Public Schools. Up next, we'll hear from Bruce Grisham. Commander Bruce Grisham is the Director of Veterans Education and Transition Services, VETS for short, and Interim Director for ROTC programs at the University of Arizona. During his Navy career as a surface warfare officer, he served in 7 shipboard assignments with shore assignments at Tactical Training Group, Pacific, and as a Chief of Staff to the Director of the Coalition of Naval Advisory and Training Team in Iraq. He holds a master's degree from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, and a master's degree from the Naval War College. Following his naval service, he was the administrative manager for the Division of Student Affairs and Enrollment Management at the University of Arizona, and since June 2019, has served as the director of the VETS Center. And next, we'll hear from one of my own folks, the community colleges, is Layla Merrifield. Layla Merrifield is the executive director of the Wisconsin Technical College District Boards Association, a nonprofit association representing Wisconsin's 144 local technical college trustees. Prior to joining the association, she was a policy advisor and legislative advocate for 2 years with the Wisconsin Technical College System, and spent 13 years as a fiscal analyst with the nonpartisan Wisconsin Legislative Fiscal Bureau. Last but certainly not least, we'll hear also from Amy Templeton. Amy has served as the president and CEO of the McWane Science Center in Birmingham, Alabama since November 2012. She previously worked at the Birmingham Museum of Art as deputy director and chief operating officer from 2005 until 2012, and as the director of development and plan giving beginning in 1999. She earned her BA in political science and sociology from Birmingham Southern College and her JD from Vanderbilt University School of Law. She then served as director of plan giving for Vanderbilt University for 14 years. Amy is an active member of her community following a devastating tornado that hit Birmingham in April 2011. She played a leadership role in recovery process in Birmingham's hard-hit Pratt City neighborhood, focusing on rebuilding a sense of community and quality of life. Please join me in welcoming our strong lineup of panelists. And with that, I'll turn it over to them for the presentations.
And up first is Linda. We'll turn it to you.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity today to share with you my experiences as both the recipient of Head Start's benefits and services and the joys and challenges as an employee of the program. Specifically, I want to focus on three things. Head Start is a critical program that substantially improves the lives of babies, young children, and families. Head Start is significantly underfunded, severely limiting its ability to help babies, young children, and families. And number three, cuts proposed to Head Start would cut off care from hundreds of thousands of families and further destabilize an already challenged program that deserves much better. Let me start with Head Start as a critical program that changes the lives of babies, young children, and their families for the better. Head Start programs support children's growth from birth to 5 years old through services that support early learning and development, health, and families' well-being. I know this from personal experience. I have worked for Head Start since 1994. When I enrolled my 3-year-old daughter, I was new in New York, and just moved from I moved from Guyana. I went to Chicago, and then I came to New York. So because I had no schooling in this country, I needed to get my GED. I was able to do that because of Head Start. While working on my GED, I began to volunteer for Head Start and worked as a substitute in the program before completing my college degree and becoming a family worker for many years, and then receiving a promotion later years to become a coordinator. For nearly 30 years, I've worked for Head Start. At first, I worked only with families at my site. And now I work with 91 families at my site and assist in coordinating family services across 3 Head Start sites. Head Start families earn low income. Eligibility for the program is also based on other risk factors, such as homelessness, food insecurities. Oh, why did I lose the thing I'm not seeing? Okay, now I can see myself. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, food insecurities. And I lost, I'm sorry. Yeah, so food insecurities, homelessness, food insecurities, foster care, developmental disabilities, and more. I work with the families of our students to ensure they know about a variety of public assistance programs and opportunities available. Start to work in partnership with parents, engaging them in security basic needs, because becoming increasingly economically secure, learning about child development and strengthening parenting skills. We help parents to enroll in education and job programs and provide crisis intervention, asset building services, and housing assistance. Importantly, we track the children's health and development by conducting screenings and connecting them to health, dental, and other services in the communities. We work with parents to set goals to support the whole child, themselves, and the family overall. And of course, Head Start teachers are preparing babies, toddlers to become successful in school and life as guided by evidence-based brain and developmental science, and providing them with nutritious meals and snacks. The long-term positive impact of Head Start on children, families, and future generation is proven. Evidence proves that experiences in the first 5 years of life shape who we become and what we do as adults. And then again, as parents for the next generation. Head Start understands that development of young children happens in the context of relationships, and that supportive, consistent relationships are essential for the youngest children. We work to provide these relationships in our program, to cultivate them with our families, and to ensure that our families know about the many services available and how to access it. I know you would all agree that Head Start's success would justify receiving full funding to support all Head Start eligible families. Unfortunately, Head Start is significantly underfunded, severely limiting its ability to help babies, young children, and families. My union, AFSCME, is requesting an increase of $5.47 billion for a total of $17.47 billion to sustain and support the Head Start workforce, provide flexibility to address local quality improvements, address the epidemic of childhood trauma, support the expansion of early Head Start and early Head Start childcare partnerships, and restore critical purchasing power compromised by inflation, and to address deferred maintenance and facility issues. But because of inadequate investment, only 36% of Head Start eligible families and 11% of early Head Start eligible families are able to participate. Low wages in the program are further restricting access and have created a workforce crisis. A recent survey indicates that 20% of Head Start and early Head Start classrooms are currently closed, largely due to the staff vacancies resulting from low wages. My experience confirmed this. As a result of this ongoing workforce crisis, current enrollment relative to funded enrollment as of February was approximately 79% Head Start and 81% for early Head Start. Why are these staff vacancies? Because the pay is too low. Head Start and early Head Start early education compensation has been far too low for decades, with wages at or just above the poverty level, making recruitment even harder. In the complexity and emotional strain of working with very young children and the families who need a lot of support and face many challenges, the pandemic, coupled with rising inflation, has made a bad problem worse. Post-pandemic, children are showing up with greater behavior challenges and developmental delays. Current levels of Head Start funding are inadequate to pay staff salaries that are competitive with their peers and equal to their education and experience. My salary doesn't hit $40,000 a year. This is very low for someone who has a college degree and nearly 30 years of experience. But I love Head Start and committed to this work. Let me tell you though, that it is not easy to live in New York City on that salary. I live with my adult son and daughter because I can't afford not to. I also have $60,000 in student debt from my bachelor's degree. I began work on my master's, but can't justify the additional costs of the remaining year and a half of work. I would only earn an additional $5,000. This is not nearly enough to foot the bill. I pay almost $100 a month for health insurance, and sometimes medical bills are expensive. For example, I recently went to an ENT doctor and was billed $500 out of pocket. As I'm helping parents access food stamps, I think, I wish I could get this. Food is so expensive now, but I'm not eligible for nutrition assistance. Teachers in Head Start make far less than teachers with similar degrees and credentials in public schools. Our teachers earn between $61,000 and almost $69,000, and these are teachers with certification and master's degrees. But their public schools counterparts earn tens and thousands of dollars more. And public school staff have summers off. We work full calendar year, except for 2 weeks in the summer when the program is closed, an additional 2 weeks of vacation to use at our discretion. Head Start teachers for 2 and 3-year-olds also have more responsibilities than school teachers, including potty training, changing diapers, but they are paid less. That's not fair, and it deters teachers from applying and staying longer. We are trying to keep classrooms open by rotating teachers and classroom assistants, but the staff is being overworked and they're overwhelmed. It seems like every time we hire a new teacher, another teacher leaves for a job that pays better. Many of them are being hired by the public schools. At our site in Far Rockaway, our Head Start site in Far Rockaway, they're not able to open 2-year-old classrooms, and they had to close 3-year-old classrooms because we can't find teachers. That's the 33% slots, funded slots, not available for parents when they are already on a long waiting list. My union secured a 55.6% cost of living adjustment for this year, but that will depend on how much money Congress provides. If there is no increase because of year-long CR or cuts, then we won't get paid more. And I probably don't need to remind you that inflation was over 8% last year. But our COLA adjustment was only not even 2% then.
Thank you, Linda.
Okay, so one more point, the cuts, which brings me to the cuts proposed by Head Start in the so-called Limit, Save, Grow Act. The House Republicans are supporting. This bill would roll back federal investments to fiscal year 2022 levels and likely cut programs like Head Start, but about 22%. And it would lock in these cuts for 10 years. That would be totally devastating, funding Head Start at 2022 levels and would eliminate at least 170,000 slots for children. A 22% reduction could eliminate more than 200,000 slots. As a result, low-income children would begin school less prepared to learn and less likely to succeed academically and socially, according to the numerous studies, would cut off from hundreds and thousands of families and further destabilize an already challenged program that deserves much better. I don't want to go over my time. I hope I'm not going over my time. One of the reasons Head Start funding is inadequate is because of the budget caps from 2011 to 2021. In the first year, 57,000 children were cut from the program. Congress scrambled to follow the following years to keep the program whole. But deep cuts will make the threat of closing classrooms real again. And tight funding will further worsen the staff crisis. We need to pay our staff living wages, equal to public school and social work counterparts. These Republicans' proposed cuts would make SNAP, Medicaid, and make many of the services that Head Start families are eligible for more difficult, if not impossible, to access. Head Start works together with programs supporting healthcare, nutrition assistance, workforce training, housing, social services, disability services, health services, behavioral health services, and more. All of these programs will be on the chopping block. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for sharing the impact of Head Start programs and also emphasizing the dire need for additional investments in our early childhood education programs.
Thank you.
Next, if we can hear from Greg. Greg, if you'd like to share a little bit about your experience.
Sure. I think a slideshow is going to show during this, and it's pictures of kids at my school for the most part. And I just figured that they're easier to look at than my ugly face. So when I think about the educational needs of my students, the greatest educational needs that we have exist outside the classroom, and those needs profoundly affect our success in the classroom. Future educational attainment would be improved most in my community by increasing SNAP benefits and programs like WIC, by expanding Medicaid, by addressing the problem of addiction that we have, by creating employment opportunities that people can take advantage of without leaving their rural community. And without that, teachers in impoverished areas will often have to serve as first responders to poverty before they can provide meaningful instruction, because Maslow's hierarchy comes before Bloom's taxonomy, and it's really that simple. Of the 3,100 or so county level administrative units in America, my county ranks in the bottom 50 for per capita income, and there are only 2 counties in America that have a lower median household income. We have drug overdose as one of our leading causes of death. Close to half our students at one point didn't live with either biological parent. I think we've managed to improve that a little bit, but we still have a great deal of family dysfunction. And so the distractions of child poverty are usually our biggest obstacle to educational achievement. And we need to see that addressed, whether it's through the Department of Education or through some other type of budget increase. Having said that, we need an approach to educational funding that views smaller rural districts more favorably and enables them to provide the same quality of education for their rural communities that's available for more populous and affluent suburban and urban communities, even if that means spending more per pupil. I don't know what has to happen in terms of formulas for that to work, but that's the situation that we're in. We need positions. We need to be able to eliminate split grades in our school system so that no teacher has to walk into a room and figure out how to teach 4th and 5th grade at the same time. We need additional special education personnel. We need increased related arts and resource personnel, music teachers and health and PE teachers, that can enable us to give collaborative planning time to the people who teach the core subjects. And one of our problems is that there are no certified people to fill those jobs. So one of the things that occurs to me at this point is that we've never been at a spot where the different threads of education that are represented by our various panelists are so intertwined. Linda is hit the nail on the head with the need for pre-K and Head Start. Most of the problems that we have here occur before a child arrives at school. And if they arrive at kindergarten behind, they're still behind when they get here to me, to middle school. And at the same time, we need higher education to find some way to produce more teachers. Otherwise, we can't fill the vacancies that we have, let alone fill new positions. So that's a dilemma for us. In the face of nationwide teacher shortages, most states at this point seem willing to find creative ways, to bring new people into the field. And I'm part of that. I'm an appointee to the West Virginia Commission for Professional Teaching Standards, which advises state agencies on finding new teachers and new paths to certifications. My district takes advantage of that. But states seem unwilling to pay teachers more, even though higher teacher pay seems to me to be the most obvious solution to the problem of a teacher shortage. We need to elevate the teaching profession to a level that draws and keeps higher quality personnel, and instead we're lowering the bar so we can get warm bodies into classroom. We need a dependable stream of more money to pay teachers. And without that, we'll probably always have a teacher shortage. Congress should fully fund special education. Right now, Congress is funding about a third of the obligation that it took on when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was created. They promised us to cover 40% of special education costs, and the appropriation levels at this point are about 13%. And we need special education to be fully funded. My own district has close to 25% of its students who have IEPs, individualized education plans, because they've been identified as having a disability. The burden in small districts when you have somebody with a profound disability that has to be sent to a residential facility, when you have students with visual impairments or hearing impairments and you have to bring consultants in when you have to do occupational therapy, we need that obligation to be fully funded that the federal government has taken on. We need funding for programs that lead to greater readiness for kindergarten, whether that's pre-K and Head Start, universal pre-K of some kind, more vigorous child find services, home visits. We need something that intervenes in the lives of the kids around us before they get to us. We need funding for programs that lead to greater daily readiness to learn. We have 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds who have adult responsibilities because their families can't step up and take those on. And they sit here in class and they think about whether or not the electricity is on and whether there's food in the refrigerator. And they're not interested in learning their timetables or their state capitals or whatever while they sit there and think about those things. And so whether it's full service centers for schools under the community school model, health and dentistry, mental health services and trauma counseling, some way to address chronic attendance problems, food insecurity, a way to address those sorts of things, as Linda mentioned earlier. We need funding that creates some way to address those daily readiness to learn issues. We need funding for technology. The pandemic has already been mentioned, and it changed the way we approach technology. We have a 1-to-1 ratio between students and devices in my school, but we need money to maintain and replace that technology. We need funding for programs that address the digital divide in the community around us. I send students home at the end of the day to cellular vacuums, and they can't afford Wi-Fi in their own home, and so they're sitting there, and they can't work on a social studies fair project at home. They can't work at a science fair project at home. They can't do anything that has to do with school until they get back to school. And we need a way to address those sorts of concerns. Um, we got to fix that. When I think about education right now, the children that come and sit in my classroom are the future of this community. And the idea that we would cut educational funding at the moment, it's like deciding you're not going to contribute to your retirement plan because times are hard. It doesn't bode well for the future. What we need at this point in time is to increase educational funding with the idea that that is part of the solution to our nation's financial problems. And we need to solve the problem of child poverty. And I see that as a big thing in terms of its scope. It's going to involve public-private partnerships. It's going to involve faith-based initiatives. It's something that is educational, but it's also moral and perhaps spiritual in some sense. And we need to find a way to stop being the developed country with one of the highest child poverty rates. And until we do that, we can make some progress in the classroom, but that progress is going to be limited by the readiness to learn issues that we face that are our biggest problems. I could go on, I could talk about this for an hour or so, but I believe my time is up and I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for emphasizing not just the need for additional investments in our K-12 system, particularly on IDEA, but also all those other outside factors that impact a child's or a student's ability to learn and be ready for a post-secondary world. So speaking of post-secondary, I'd like to turn it over now to Commander Grisham. Commander Grisham, if you be so kind to share your remarks.
Thanks, Jose. Yeah, first I'd like to thank the Committee for Education Funding for their work in supporting education at all levels, and even the opportunity to come here today together with so many esteemed panelists from all areas of the education continuum is certainly important as we look at what the future holds and what Linda and Greg have already versed. I'm going to talk just a little bit about my experience at the University of Arizona, because I think it's indicative of college campuses as a whole, and I'm going to try to cover some of the needs at the university level that I'm familiar with, and certainly, as was stated in my background, I'm not a lifelong educator in the sense that I've stayed in education my entire career. I'm relatively new to the career, but learning as fast as I can in supporting our students on campus. And I was raised in Arizona, mostly attended the University of Arizona in the late 80s. And when I graduated in 1990, I commissioned in the Navy and went off and drove ships for the Navy for over 20 years. And along the way, I had the opportunity to come back and teach at the ROTC program that was the source of my commissioning. And so that was my first introduction to higher education as a instructor or staff member. And after I retired from the Navy, I stayed on campus and as was noted, in a couple of roles in student affairs, and now working with our military connected students on campus. And observing my colleagues and learning from my colleagues across campus, I think students, I can say confidently that each one of them look at students as our highest priority. I always remember my time in service. I tried to live by the motto that people matter most, and taking that to the education realm is very important, and it's very applicable in the time you've just heard from Linda and Greg in some of the things on how that applies. But people often ask or people look at universities and say, why does it cost so much to attend? universities. And I think student support expectations, I reflect back, 30 years ago when I was a student and look now at the student support services that campuses offer is wide ranging and far more extensive than when I was a student. Certainly in the area of mental wellness, it's more than just counseling. It's more than just our counseling services on campus, as well as many other campuses. There are basic needs centers, campus pantries, support for childcare. We have a program called SOS, and it stands for Support, Opportunity, and Success. And it's a program where a student or a family member can call or chat directly with a university staff member and really ask any question they have and get directed to the right avenue for support. All of these types of services contribute to our students feeling less stress, removing stressors from their life. If they know that if they're food insecure, that there's a place where they can get food. They're in need of childcare, or if they just have any question about campus, there are resources for them. And those, by removing those stressors on our students, that certainly in turn contributes to their academic success. In the area of health services, most campuses have some type of college health center where students can go for healthcare, but there's also trauma support. On our campus, it's called Survivor Advocacy is one, Oasis Sexual Assault Center is one, where students can receive support for sexual assault issues or relationship violence issues. Those type of incidents regrettably happen far too often in not just our campus, but in our communities as a whole. And then, of course, there's the area of academic support. Certainly support in STEM fields and in STEM regions, but really in general all over campus. We have a few programs such as Arizona Assurance, which supports low-income students, Arizona residents that are attending the university, and provides support for them. First Cat supports our first generation college students, those that don't have the support maybe of their parents having that experience and can't guide them through the college experience. We have a whole department and a whole area dedicated to supporting those students, as well as our SALT Center, which is Strategic Alternative Learning Techniques, to support our students that have some learning challenges or some learning disabilities. But then even on the cultural side, we have multiple cultural centers, even our VETS Center. We have our own sense of diversity even within our VETS Center and our military connected students, but we have a resource center for all of our students. We have some initiatives to support immigrant students, men of color initiatives to increase graduation rates amongst that population. And for students that are just maybe unsure as they make the transition from high school to college as to what it's going to be like. We have a program called New Start that supports their transition the summer before they start classes in the fall and gets them some classroom experience so that they feel confident as they enter the fall semester that they can succeed. All of these support areas certainly align with our university core values, which are our integrity, compassion, exploration, adaptation, inclusion, and determination. I look across all my colleagues in campus that work in these areas, recognizing we have about 50,000 students on our campus in every area, 150 majors. We're a tier 1 research institution, a Hispanic serving institution, as well as many others. And for my own experience, particularly at VETS, at Veterans Education and Transition Services, we have, of our campus population, I have about 5,000 military connected students that I work with, which is about 10% of our campus population. And we support students in, I mentioned a number of areas across campus, but I break it down into what we call the 4 E's at VETS: engage, educate, empower, and employ. In my role, from day to day, I try to make sure that we engage the students working with admissions who are our military connected students, identify them early, reach out to them and make sure that they understand the resources that we have available in our student centers, the educate and empower piece, make sure they understand how to navigate the complexities of the campus environment, who's their academic advisor, how do they register for classes, how do they negotiate their military, either VA or DoD funding benefits that support their education, as well as empower. I try to, as much as I want all my students to come to the Vet Center, to our Military Connected Student Center, I don't want them to stay there. We have over 400 clubs and organizations on campus, and I want them to get out and explore each one of those so that they can find the place and connect with all the resources and all the communities on campus that will fulfill them in their student experience. And then certainly, last but not least, employ, kind of our mission. One of our missions certainly is to make sure that our students gain meaningful employment at the end of their academic journey. Partnering with our campus career services, community partners such as 50 Strong, which provides some employer networking and some career readiness support. All of these things support the mission of our university, which is to continuously improve how we educate and innovate so we can lead in a way developing adaptive problem solvers capable of tackling our greatest challenges. None of this happens without resources. And as has been outlined and highlighted by previous speakers and by Sarah as well, resources are tight, and funding and figuring out which resources to fund across the nation is a challenging job for all of our legislatures and executive branch leaders. But certainly investments in education provide great returns. And I think there's no disputing that. Our educated workforce provides many great returns in business and local, state, and federal government, and certainly even internationally. And so just to finish up here, I'd like to certainly thank CEF for their support and their work in this area and highlighting all the different programs that are available to fund, that Congress can look at and say, which ones are we going to fund? And also thank them for their advocacy and making sure that each one of these things are very important. And to reduce spending in the areas is going to present future challenges, as Greg mentioned, that simply aren't worth the cuts that are being pursued by some. So I'd also like to thank just my fellow panelists for their insights, and as I continue my own education of learning, and hope that as students come through Head Start and primary school and secondary school and up into university, that they don't stop learning at that point. And I'm going to turn it over to our next panelist, who's going to, the continuum of education certainly continues beyond the university. And so thanks for your time, and I'll turn it over now.
Thank you, Commander Grisham, and thank you for the reminder that, you know, higher education isn't just a student comes in and goes to class and gets a degree, but there's a lot of different pieces that work into that, a lot of supportive services, a lot of supportive programs. And it's not just your traditional students, 18 to 24-year-olds. It's a lot of veterans returning from their service, trying to get additional skills, additional education. But all of that takes money, all of that takes resources, and the federal government should be there to provide some of those investments, because it's ultimately it's a national security issue. It's also a societal, like, greater education issue. But I'd like to turn it over to someone who's very, very familiar with serving students from all walks of life and different stages in their lives. So with that, I'll turn it over to Layla.
Yeah, thanks, Jose, and thanks to the folks from CEF for having me today. It's an exciting opportunity to talk about just how important federal dollars are, really at every level of education. So I'm with the Wisconsin Technical College District Boards Association. We have 16 comprehensive community and technical colleges. We touch every corner of the state of Wisconsin. And I think in many ways we are emblematic of community colleges all across the country and the work that we're doing in our communities. We serve everyone. We were founded in 1911 as open access institutions. And today we serve everybody from ages 16 to 60 and even beyond. We have locations in 50 counties across the state of Wisconsin. We are really embedded in those communities. And I just want to provide a few examples of the ways in which we braid funding from the federal, state, and local taxpayers to serve our communities and to serve just a wide range of people in our communities. So justice involved individuals, everyone from those who are incarcerated to folks who are making their reentry from incarceration. Federal funding is particularly important to support a very under-resourced area with great need. We know from the data that folks who are incarcerated are typically much less likely to have received their high school diplomas, much more likely to have literacy and basic skills deficits. And we know that providing them with education while they're incarcerated makes it much more likely that they will be successful. They will not return to jail or prison. So Wisconsin Technical Colleges are tasked in state statute with a number of responsibilities, including providing some collaborative education to those in our state prisons. We're in 25 of 27 state prisons currently, and we're in 38 of 72 county jails, and serve approximately 6,000 incarcerated folks every year, as well as those who are reentering after incarceration. And yet, I just want to point out that the importance of federal funding, particularly for basic skills for adult basic education, English language learning. Although we're serving 6,000 incarcerated, there are 20,000 folks who are on our state Department of Corrections wait list every single year for education. So folks who are interested in pursuing education, and we just don't have the funds to serve them currently. Next slide, please. I mentioned we serve everyone starting at 16. So high school and K-12 partnerships are also an incredibly important part of what we do. We're up to 57,000 Wisconsin high school students who are served in some sort of dual credit opportunity currently every year. But that's only around 22% of Wisconsin high school students. And we know that with more resources, we could pursue those opportunities and make career and technical education in particular more available across Wisconsin's high schools. And at the bottom of that particular slide, you'll see that we do have our eyes on equity at all times, and in terms of the populations that are being served in high schools. And we know that we're not doing enough to serve our minoritized populations, English language learners, immigrant communities. And we want to do more and make sure that these opportunities that, again, we know tend to lead to greater high school graduation rates, greater retention rates once these students come to college, and greater credential awards and graduation rates once they make it to college, if they're involved in a dual credit opportunity when they're in high school. It keeps students engaged, and certainly saves them tuition. On the other end, 80% of our dual credit opportunities are offered tuition free, as well as the adult basic education and the English language learning education that we offer in our communities. Those are all offered tuition free for families. Next slide, please. And I'll just quickly go through some of our outcomes. We also provide the classroom related instruction for apprenticeships at Wisconsin Technical Colleges. We're heavily involved in WIOA programs across the state. Perkins 5 and adult education and family literacy are all important sources of funding for the work that we do. And our outcomes, I think, really speak for themselves. Median salary for graduates of all degrees, and that's short-term certificates all the way up to 2-year associate degrees, is $46,000, so a living wage. And we also see 54% growth over the first 5 years for our graduates post-credential across all areas of education. Our median salary for apprentices is around $80,000. Apprenticeship is an incredibly valuable opportunity. I'd certainly like to see more federal investment in apprenticeship programs, not less. It's an opportunity for post-secondary education that comes debt-free, that really leads to, again, family supporting wages on the other end. 93% of our graduates from technical colleges are in the labor force 6 months after graduation, and more than 75% are in a job that is directly related to their training. 92% of technical college graduates live and work here in Wisconsin. So, and employer satisfaction, student satisfaction, all of our surveys show tremendous results on the other end. And I think community colleges in many cases can be sold a little bit short traditionally, and there's an attitude that that community colleges are something less than, and I would argue that is not at all the case. Our graduates are successful, our programs are economically viable, and really investing in community colleges and in the federal programs that support community college students is really essential for, as Jose sort of alluded to, our national security, our economic viability as a nation going forward. All that we want to accomplish and want to do as a country today in a post-pandemic world, I think can be supported and made more secure with community college investment. So everything from climate adaptation, climate change mitigation, those programs such as renewable energy, those programs and training are often provided via community colleges and workforce investment via technical colleges and comprehensive community colleges. We want to remain competitive. We want to implement the Infrastructure Act that the federal government has invested in. We want to implement the CHIPS Act and bring semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States and support that industry for all sorts of national security reasons. Those industries are going to depend on community and technical college graduates. So I don't want to go on too much in terms of what we do, but we do touch every corner of our communities. And as you can see within our WTCS federal priorities, again, I think these are shared across community colleges across the nation. We are seeing huge demand for short-term Pell in terms of short-term certificates in IT, for CDL, for healthcare. There's a range of high quality short-term programs that are in demand in our communities, and providing a short-term Pell option would certainly be beneficial to our students. We know that here in Wisconsin, over 50% of our students every year are so under-resourced that they have $0 in terms of an expected family contribution in filling out their FAFSA. So we know that our students are deeply in need, and Pell Grants certainly help support their education and moving forward economically. At the same time, we're seeing increasing need around basic needs, which the other panelists have mentioned. All 16 of our campuses or all 16 of our institutions rather have some sort of food pantry on campus. we've even moved in some of our technical colleges have moved to what are essentially free cafeterias. So there might be a self-checkout, and if you can afford to pay for your cafeteria meal that day, that's fine, that's great. But if not, it's fine to just take the food. So that's the depth of need in terms of what we're seeing for our students. Housing insecurity is an ongoing issue that technical colleges are grappling with. Childcare has also been discussed extensively for many of our colleges. Their average student is a working single parent, around 29 years old. So these are people who are working hard to support their children, support their families, and move into a better wage category, and provide their families with a better economic opportunity. Workforce training is a huge part of what we do at technical colleges. Increasing investments in Perkins, AEFL, and apprenticeship would be incredibly beneficial. I'll just give you one quick example of the braiding of funding and how critical federal investment can be in many cases. Of course, Wisconsin, like many states, has substantial immigrant populations who require English language education. We recently had a budget shortfall at our Milwaukee Technical College, and they were only able to provide 20 out of the 24 planned English language courses in South Milwaukee. South Milwaukee is a heavily Hispanic, heavily immigrant community, and the Milwaukee Tech has an outreach center right in Walker Square in order to serve that community. And in even cutting just 4 out of 24 courses, that community has really just had an outpouring of really protest and just making the case for how incredibly important these English language classes are. We've seen protests for the last few months at each board meeting, a board of trustees meeting for Milwaukee Tech, and we are sort of scrambling to support that college and make sure that we can restore those English language classes. Again, that's a braided funding model between AEFL, state and local funding to support what is really a critical service for folks who are hoping to advance in their workplaces, hoping to succeed in their workplaces, hoping to start their own businesses, and really invest in themselves and invest in Milwaukee. So it's when there is some sort of funding shortfall, it affects communities really right away, and in really detrimental ways. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions, but I do want to allow us to move on to our next panelist.
Thank you, Leila, and thank you for sharing one about the impact of the various programs and the impact in getting folks credentialed and ready to work and on the workforce, but also the dire need for additional resources and the impact that it can have as we look towards potential cuts this year. And what can that mean in our local communities? Last but certainly not least, I'd like to turn it over to Amy, and then once Amy's done with her presentation, there will be some time for the audience to ask some questions to the panelists. So if you start getting ready, getting your questions ready, but between then and now, Amy, if you can share with us some of your experiences as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you today on behalf of the thousands of museums and museum professionals that provide education programs to supplement classroom learning. Museums are the keepers of our history, our culture, our scientific knowledge, and so much more. They help to connect people to information and ideas. Nearly all museums have an education component to their programs and activities. And while most are committed to lifelong learning, there's a very strong emphasis on pre-K through 12 education. Let me give you an example of museum education programming from my own science center, McWane Science Center. In 2022, even though we were still very much recovering from the pandemic, nearly 50,000 children came to us through school field trips. As they plan these field trips, teachers can select from specific programs led by our educators and conducted in one of our 7 classrooms. While each of these programs is designed to meet grade-specific course of study requirements, we don't simply replicate what the students learn in the classrooms. Instead, we use hands-on activities designed to excite and inspire students, to spark wonder and curiosity about the subject matter. Museums help concepts children learn in the classroom come alive in ways that help them to want to learn more. If students can't come to us, then we go to them with programs in classrooms and libraries all across our state. Many museums have very robust outreach programs that expand their sphere of influence well beyond the communities where they are physically located. In addition to our classroom programs, students can also participate in one of our 2 design studios, where they use engineering design principles to create solutions to grade-appropriate challenges. Here they learn 21st century skills like critical thinking, communication, creative problem solving, and collaboration. These are skills that today's employers are finding lacking in so many of the incoming workforce. Museums also often serve as the early stages of the workforce development pipeline, preparing younger children to pursue more concentrated studies in science, technology, the arts, and the many future careers that don't even exist yet. Museums also provide professional development programs for teachers, both for those who already serve in the classroom and pre-service teachers who are studying to be future educators. At McWane, we conduct workshops for teachers in all grade levels to help them turn STEM concepts into hands-on opportunities that they can use in their classrooms. Museums are also serve as economic engines and job creators. According to Museums as Economic Engines, a national report, pre-pandemic U.S. museums supported more than 726,000 jobs and contributed $50 billion to the U.S. economy each year, including a significant impact on individual states. For example, in my home state of Alabama, the total financial impact that museums have on the economy is $473 million, including 9,510 jobs. Nationally, museums spend more than $2 billion yearly on education activities, and the typical museum devotes 75% of its education budget to K through 12 students. McWane Science Center is just one of 35,000 museums across the country that supplement the education that our students receive in their classrooms. The primary federal funding source for museums and libraries is the Institute of Museum and Library Services, known as IMLS. Within that agency, the Office of Museum Services, OMS, supports all types of museums by awarding grants that help them better serve their communities. OMS awards grants in every state to help museums digitize, enhance, and preserve collections, provide teacher professional development, and create innovative cross-cultural and multidisciplinary programs and exhibits for schools and the general public. OMS grants to museums are highly competitive and decided through a rigorous peer review process. In addition to the dollar-for-dollar match that's generally required of museums, these grants often spur more giving by private foundations and individual donors. In fiscal year 2022, Congress provided $268 million to IMLS, of which $47.6 million was directed to the Office of Museum Services. With this funding, OMS provided 280 grants totaling $44.6 million to museums and related organizations in 48 states. By leveraging significant private, state, and local funding, OMS grants amplify a small federal investment for maximum impact on the community. There's a high demand for funding from the Office of Museum Services. In fiscal year 2022, OMS received 716 applications, requesting more than $109 million. But current funding levels allow the agency to fund only a small percentage of the highly rated grant applications that it receives. For fiscal year 2024, OMS is requesting an increase in its budget from $55.5 million last year to $65.5 million in 2024, which would allow it to increase its grant capacity for museums funds that museums need as they continue to recover from the pandemic and to serve their communities. The pandemic has inflicted profound damage to U.S. museums, the vast majority of which are 501c3 nonprofit charitable organizations. The museum field will take years to recover to pre-pandemic levels of staffing, revenue, and attendance. Due to several federal relief programs, however, far fewer museums than were initially expected are in danger of permanent closure, and tens of thousands of jobs were saved. However, according to a 2022 survey, attendance was down nearly 40% for many of our nation's museums. Museums are essential community infrastructure, and our recovery is still in process. Here's some examples from the McWane Science Center of how OMS helps museums better serve the public. In 2019, McWane received an OMS grant in the amount of $134,000 to strengthen the science engagement experience within our museum. The grant allowed us to create a novel and defined science engagement framework to support visitor interaction and learning. This led to a complete reformatting of our engagement and interpretation activities and the development of new programs and exhibitions to allow our visitors to learn more and to apply that new knowledge to their own everyday experiences. In 2021, we received an OMS grant in the amount of $222,000 for the planning and design of a new permanent exhibit and education program that encourages visitors to learn STEM principles through the lens of popular music. In addition to teaching STEM principles, we believe this exhibit will help us broaden and diversify our audiences, providing greater exposure to STEM among underrepresented Science Center visitors, including people of color, older teens, and young adults. This grant is an excellent example of how OMS supports and encourages exploration and development of new ideas and creative innovations. Funding was provided for the planning of exhibit content, development of a formal evaluation plan, exhibit prototyping, and final exhibit design plan. These early elements are crucial in bringing projects from an idea to a reality, but they're often very hard to fund in the private sector. The activities supported by OMS have allowed us to progress to a point where now private funds are being committed to this project, forming a true public-private partnership that will benefit our museum and the community that we serve. Also in 2021, McWane Science Center received an OMS grant through the American Rescue Plan in the amount of $36,000 to support education initiatives for the 2021-22 school year. Initiatives included developing and implementing school-based outreach programs, virtual programming, teacher workshops, and classroom resources. The funding enabled us to deliver outreach programming to more than 12,000 children. We also created and presented professional development programs for early childhood teachers from pre-K to early elementary school, serving nearly 300 teachers during that school year. The funding was also used to develop STEM kits for a variety of grade levels that teachers could check out and use in their own classrooms. And it also helped us develop an expanded education delivery model, including digital programming as a staple in addition to our in-person services. These OMS grants and the many others like them made to museums all across the country make a transforming impact on American museums and the teachers, students, and families that we serve. In closing, I want to highlight recent national public opinion polling that shows that 95% of voters would approve of lawmakers who acted to support museums, and 96% want federal funds for museums to be maintained or increased. Museums have a profound positive impact on society, and they're important partners in the education of our students at all grade levels. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I think we do have a few minutes still for a Q&A. And for everyone who's watching, if you have a question for our panelists, please go ahead and use the Q&A function to drop your question there. And so I'll just get us started with a question for all of our panelists. We've heard about how, additional funding is needed, and some of you gave examples about where there's more funding needed, such as, Layla's example of the needing to cut English language courses that were offered, or Linda talking about how So many students who are eligible for Head Start can't get a seat. So I'd love to hear from each. And as you may know, education funding in programs both within the Department of Education and in other agencies has not kept up with inflation for more than a decade. And as has been referenced several times, yesterday, the House passed a bill that would increase the debt ceiling for up to 11 months. And in exchange, it would cut discretionary funding back to fiscal year 22 levels and cap the growth at 1% per year for 10 years. So really lock in lower level of funding for the next decade. This plan would cut funding for the next year anywhere from 9 to 22%, depending on whether defense and other programs would be cut or not. So I'm curious if each of you can offer up an example of what those choices would look like in your program. If your program received an almost cut of 1/4 of the federal funding, what are some of the choices, the tough choices that your program would have to make in terms of services or people maybe not served or along those lines? So I don't know, does anyone want to go, or shall I call on someone first? Thanks, Greg. Go ahead.
The biggest impact it would probably have for us would be in special education. We have difficulty now with the idea that ideally students should be afforded 3 or 4 different streams of opportunity. We have special education students who spend their whole day with their peers. We have students who are shadowed by a special educator in the classroom with their peers. We have students who are pulled out for core classes, but are with their peers for some of the other things. And then we have the students who spend most of their day self-contained. But that requires personnel. Personnel gets salary, and salary involves funding. And so the less funding we have, the fewer choices we're able to provide our special education students. And that's really a simple example of it.
Thank you, Greg. Linda.
For Head Start, less funding means closing classrooms, less children, and then it trickles down to less staff, because if we don't have the children to serve, we have to let staff go. So then you have the unemployment rate going up, stem from just a cut in Head Start.
Thanks for that example. Bruce, can I call on you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah. I think, at the university level, certainly some of our great initiatives, and I think Layla mentioned it, our HSI initiatives, for example, might be an area that might see some funding, but even things like school safety initiatives that cost money to make our campuses and our classrooms safe. There's a whole lot of areas where federal funding is going to support keeping our students safe and making sure they're successful, whether it be in programs that inspire them to recognize, for example, with our HSI initiatives, inspire them to recognize that they're able to attain an education where they may not have previously thought that was possible. And federal funding supports that, whether it's through Pell Grants or whether it's through other programs that support those types of initiatives, could be severely impacted, which then would have the result of not diversifying our workforce, which is in so great need.
Thanks. And Amy, did you have an example you could share?
Sure. Museums are funded, like I said, through the Office of Museum Services on a grant basis. So museums submit ideas and projects and then receive those grants. 2022 funding was for a little over $47 million. There are 35,000 museums across the country. That's about $1,300 per museum if you really if you doled it out in that way. What would happen is there would be far fewer new exhibits, far fewer education programs, And museums are still very much recovering from this pandemic. It could be a tipping point for some museums, whether they can hang on. We've had a lot of museum closures, and the way that you come back from this is to have programs and visitation that is meaningful and growing, and it's going to be very hard to do without that funding.
Great. Thank you. I'll try to do a pretty quick question for each of you before, I do see one question in the chat I'll get to as well. If other participants have, please use the Q&A function. So I'll start with Linda. Oh, no, I'll come back to Linda in a minute. I'll start with Greg. Greg, you mentioned in your remarks about how the federal government has underfunded the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which Congress passed about 50 years ago, and promised to cover 40% of the funding, but the federal share has never approached that level and is currently, as you said, less than 13%. So the vast majority is paid for by state and local education budgets. Can you talk, and you talked just a moment ago about some of those choices that have to get made, but what is the effect of really an unfunded mandate in West Virginia? The fact that there are these requirements, for the services for students with disabilities, and those cost money. What does that then mean, not only for the students with disabilities, but for the rest of the school community when the federal government doesn't live up to their share and underfunds that mandate?
The simple answer to that is that we end up taking money that might be used in any variety of ways and using it to fulfill that mandate instead. We have to find money that could be unencumbered someplace else, that might go into after-school activities, that might pay to divide up those split grade classrooms that we're stuck with, that might expand, bring a robotics program or something for after school or whatever. And instead of having that extra potential spending power, we end up having instead to take that money and put it into what is a mandate, what has to be done under federal law. And those students with disabilities have a right to have those things done for them. It's just that we weren't supposed to be the ones footing the bill for that. And so here we are.
Thanks. And for those of us, could you just clarify what a split classroom is that you just mentioned?
A split classroom, my school for next year is going to have a classroom where there's third graders and fourth graders potentially sitting in the room, depending on exactly who shows up, and a classroom where there's fourth graders and fifth graders sitting in the room. And so a teacher has standards that they have to teach to the fifth graders, and they have standards that they have to teach to the fourth graders. And somehow they're going to have to divide up their time so that while the fifth graders are doing something, they can present material to the fourth graders that they're supposed to have as well. Sometimes that involves blending the two together, but often it involves basically splitting your time up so that kids work independently when they really need a teacher's attention.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
I'm going to go now a quick question for Bruce, which is the president's budget for next year would increase the maximum Pell Grant by $820 or 11% and boost funding for other federal financial aid programs, as well as increasing institutional support for HBCUs and colleges serving low income and high need students. Can you talk about what that the impact that increase would have on the students that you see?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Pell Grant, and it's been mentioned a number of times already today, is a critical part of funding for university students. And I think in the budget book, as I recall, about almost 70% of students across the nation receive Pell Grant funding. And here at the University of Arizona, almost, I think 9 in 10 students receive some type of financial aid funding for their education. Historically, the Pell Grant and the president's request for the increase is indicative of the need. When you look at the gap between the current Pell Grant funding and the cost of attendance at a university is growing quite rapidly over the last 10 or 15 years. Certainly that gap is increasing quite rapidly. And so the increase to Pell Grant funding would provide a number of students opportunities to attend a university or another community college or other learning program where they may not have had that opportunity before. As was mentioned as well, we're starting to see more and more students on our campus and across the nation that are supporting a family or are working full time and balancing other life responsibilities with their education. And so the requested increase for Pell Grants is critical to support their students, to ensure that they can do both, that they can attain their education while at the same time supporting other family or life commitments that they might have.
Great. Thank you. A question for Layla. How needs for workforce development changed as the pandemic-induced changes become woven into our economy? How could federal support best help students and employers navigate and succeed in this new economy?
Yeah, I think it's really critical that we invest in our own people and that we invest in our education systems, really from birth all the way through workforce training. I think this is an incredibly tumultuous economy. We're seeing pretty sticky inflation. At the same time, we have a very tight labor market. And our employers here in Wisconsin are begging for skilled talent across industries, whether that's childcare, whether that's manufacturing, agriculture, food processing. Really, I spent a lot of time with dentists this summer, and their need for dental hygienists and dental assistants is acute. In a place like Wisconsin, where our demographics are really working against us, we're a rapidly aging population. And we really cannot afford to leave anyone behind. So I think it's critical that everything from literacy skills, basic skills, adult basic education, all the way up to really what amounts to high tech training in advanced manufacturing and very high skill jobs in the trades. All of those factors are important. They all need federal funding, and as I mentioned before, as this economy continues to change, if we're going to remain competitive, if we're going to remain the United States and the place that we occupy globally, if we want to remain economically secure, we have to invest in our own folks here so that they can support our supply chain, logistics, manufacturing here in the United States, as well as providing healthcare services for our aging population, for our elders. We really have needs at every level in every industry, and it's critical to remain incredibly flexible and adaptable, I think, as higher education institutions, in order to meet those needs as they arise. We know that the higher education landscape is changing, and I think community and technical colleges are really at the forefront of that, both using technology to expand access to everyone who's interested in post-secondary education, but also making sure that our population is ready and is globally competitive and can continue to support the economy here in the United States.
Right. Well, thanks for that. And, I think you said it, that the investments we make in education, it's not just spending, not just in workforce development across the entire continuum. It's not just spending, it's investments. And so thank you all for sharing your perspectives, and I'm happy to turn it back to Emily to wrap us up.
Amazing. I will echo that. Thank you to everyone who presented today. It is clear that the impact of cuts or investments have an impact on everyone in every community across the country. So again, a huge thank you to the members of the CEF community who worked on the budget book and today's briefing. CEF members and Hill staff who registered for today's briefing will receive a link to access the electronic version of the book, and the book will be made available to the public at a later date. The book's charts will be publicly available on the budget book section of the CEF website at cef.org. And any Hill education staff can request a physical copy of the book by emailing CEF at info@cef.org and providing your name and office. CEF has a plethora of other great advocacy resources like Sarah Abernathy's famous funding tables and charts, fact sheets, and a social media toolkit, all available online. So unless Sarah Abernathy has anything else, thank you everyone for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.